and art. End of quote. The revealed music of the divine word can be seen as the archetype of all musicality. And this is one of the most tangible and transformative modes of beauty in creation. Because it's a kind of descent of supraformal celestial melody within the field of audible terrestrial sound. The Algerian Sufi master of the last century, Sheikh al-Alawi, makes a remark that is very pertinent here. It's a remark translated and amplified by Hastoneest. Music is not crippled by the dry bones of words. Liquid and flowing like a stream, it carries us into the presence of God. End quote. This saying might be seen in turn as a comment on the saying of the Prophet ﷺ, amongst the greatest of the beauties of creation is the fine intonation of a beautiful voice. None of this can be separated from the inner joy, from the ecstasy that is offered by the recitation of the Quran. The experience of joy, as well as peace, are crucial components in the aesthetic sensibility which generates artistic creativity. In his monumental Futuhat al-Makkiyah, the 13th century Spanish mystic Muhyiddin ibn Arabi writes that when the Quran truly descends upon the heart and not just upon the tongue, the result is a sweetness, a halawa, beyond all measure, surpassing all delight, all ladha. This sweetness and delight are brought about by the reverberations of the divine word in the heart. And it is these interiorizing reverberations that carry one into the presence of God. For through this joyous mode of contemplation, the heart is rendered receptive to the haqiqah of the Quran, and from this haqiqah to al-haqiqah, the truth, the spiritual reality as such. Now this kind of contemplation can be regarded as a mode of tawheed, an integration, understanding it according to its etymology, making one. It's a making one, a kind of communion in which human love is united, integrated with divine beauty. The love in the heart of the reciter is at one with the beauty of the uncreated Word of God. This has immense practical consequences for anyone concerned with the relationship between human art and divine revelation, because when the heart is attuned to the harmony, the divine harmony conveyed by the divine revelation, it's better able to discern the traces of that harmony, the signs of that harmony, the archetype of all beauty, within the entire field of manifestation. In other words, all phenomena of virgin nature and all the productions of sacred art. This underlines the importance of the relationship between the creativity of the Muslim artist and the witnessing of divine unity. The artist in Islam is first and foremost one who witnesses the evidence of God's oneness and beauty in the handiwork, literally the sunnah, Sad, Nun, Ain of God. This is a term that we find in the Quran, verse 88 of Surah number 27. The sunnah, the handiwork, the creation, with a sense of an artisanship impacting upon that creation. And that's why it's legitimate to refer to God as Asania, the artisan, literally the one who creates as an artisan does, manufactures within the higher sense of the term. Moses likewise is referred to in this term because God says to him in the Surah Taha, verse 41, وَاسْتَنَعْتُكَ لِنَفْسِي, I have fashioned you for myself. And this means that every messenger of God is a perfect work of art, a perfect work of divine art. Let's note also in passing that in the Islamic spiritual tradition, this idea of the Quran as the revealed word and the transformative alchemical magic that brings one into harmony with the divine is not restricted to the Quran itself, because we're told in several verses of the Quran about other scriptures, and that in those scriptures there is likewise light and guidance, nur and huda. So other scriptures have this function. I won't cite any of those verses now, but I'll just say that in the perspective of Rusbihan Bakri, who we'll speak about in some detail in a moment, it's very interesting that in one of his visions, he says that he saw the prophets, alayhi wassalam ajma'een, and each of the prophets gave Rusbihan their scripture, and he came to taste the Quran through the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He tasted the Psalms through David. He tasted the Injil through Jesus. So this idea of tasting the scriptures is fundamental to the alchemical transformation that the scripture can effect upon us. And this idea of tasting is particularly important when we also look at the doctrinal exposition of unity and its contemplative implications. Because if we don't taste the ideas that the Quran tells us about with our heart, and it only becomes a form of thought or ideas in the mind, we'll miss out this aesthetic dimension to Quranic revelation. The fundamental message that the Quran imparts to us concerning the intrinsic nature of reality is given in terms of the names and qualities of God. It's very important here to stress that these names and qualities are referred to as Al-Asma Al-Husna, the most beautiful names of God. Now among these names you have Al-Muntaqim, you have Al-Qahar, you have the Avenger, you have the All-Crushing, names that one doesn't normally associate with beauty. Nonetheless, all of the names of God are referred to as Al-Asma Al-Husna, several verses of the Quran. In other words, being in its totality is beautiful. Just as the names and qualities of God are all of them beautiful, even if the manifestations of some will be on the surface apparently lacking beauty. There will be severe and concrete. Categorical definition, however, of all of these names is not just beautiful, but most beautiful. In verse 110 of the Surah Al-Isra, we're told, Ud'u Allah wa ud'u Rahman, call upon God or call upon Ar-Rahman. So the closest synonym to Allah, the name that most revealingly discloses to us the nature of God, is Ar-Rahman, which we can translate as the lovingly merciful, the lovingly compassionate. We're going to move now to the hadith that we started with. Inna Allaha Jamilun wa yuhibbul Jamal. In a recent, remarkable work, pioneering work one might say, His Royal Highness Prince Ghazi bin Muhammad has shown us, it's a book called Love in the Quran simply. He's shown us in this remarkable work the subtle interlocking ways in which love operates throughout being, emanating from God to His creation. And to summarize this argument, we can say very simply that if God loves beauty, Inna Allaha Jamilun wa yuhibbul Jamal, if He loves beauty, then He loves the entirety of His creation. Because we're told in verse 7 of the Surah Sajda that He made beautiful everything that He created. Ahsana kulla shay'in khalaqa. He made beautiful everything. And I stress this notion of beauty in relation to ihsan for reasons that will become clear. I was a hidden treasure, God tells us in the famous Hadith Qudsi. Kuntu kanzan makhfiyan, fa'ahbabtu an u'raf. And I loved to be known. God loved to be known, not just wished. And He wished to make His inner beauty, inna Allah jamilun, He wished to make this inner beauty known to another. Now the beauty of the treasure is what He wanted to be known. The treasure is priceless, it's treasured because of its beauty. And the apparent other that He wished to participate, wished to allow to participate in this beauty is al-insan. What does al-insan mean apart from man? It means the pupil of the eye. So the very notion of insan takes us to the function of contemplation of the divine beauty which God wished to make known. It's insan alone who can see in all its fullness the manifestation of divine beauty, because man alone is made in the image of God, in the image of that beauty. Inna Allah khalaqa Adama ala suratihi. Truly God created man according to His own image, as the Prophet tells us, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. I stress this idea of making beautiful as regards ahsana kulla shay'in khalaqahu, and not just made excellent in the Surah Sajda. Because when we look at the root of the word ahsan, ihsan, we see that this root ha, sin, nun means to be beautiful. Hasana means to be beautiful, to be fine, to be excellent. And if we follow the translation of Chitik and Murata in their important work, The Vision of Islam, we will have a transformed understanding of every single instance of the use of the word ihsan or muhsin. The root comes in the Quran over 200 times. Repeatedly we're told about the muhsinun, the muhsin. And this is not just the ones who do good, but the ones who make beautiful. If we understand this, our whole reading of the Quran is transformed. Rather than simply think of a muhsin as one who is a good, virtuous human being, rather we should think of the muhsin. We are all called upon to become muhsinun. We're all called upon to become works of art, to become people who make beautiful. We're made in the image of God, and we conform to the beauty in which we were made to the extent that we engage with creation as muhsinun, as creators of beauty. So in the ethical tradition of Islam, we find that goodness and evil are simply given to you in terms of husn and qubh, beauty and ugliness. That which is beautiful is good, that which is ugly is evil. So aesthetics actually constitute the heart of ethics, and both metaphysics and ethics are integrated within an ethical point of view when it comes to human relationships, but ethics and aesthetics are integrated within metaphysics when it comes to understanding our relationship with reality, the ultimate truth. All three, metaphysics, aesthetics and ethics, are combined in this notion of ihsan. Why? Because of the prophetic definition of al-ihsan in the famous hadith Jibreel, which I'm sure all of you know, in which the Prophet was asked the three fundamental questions, a few other questions later, but the three fundamental questions. And remember that the Prophet ﷺ said the man who came and asked these questions was Jibreel, when they said, who was this person? And he asked, what is Islam, what is Iman, and what is Ihsan? Islam gave the five pillars. Iman, you should believe in God and His prophets, His angels, His scriptures, and the last day, and the divine decree. And at each time, each answer, the angel said, Sadaqat, you've spoken true. But when he asked what is ihsan, the Prophet answered in a way that makes us think he may be repeating himself, because he answers with something concerning worship. Al-ihsan an ta'bud Allah ka'annaka tara, fa in lam takun tara, fa innahu yarak. Al-ihsan is that you should worship God as if you could see Him, and if you cannot see Him, He can see you. You might think he's repeating himself because Salah was already mentioned as one of the pillars of Islam. But here we're talking about a mode of worship which is all-encompassing. It's a mode of worship in which we are, as it were, confronted with the very vision, the very face of God Himself, who is there wherever we turn, according to the Quran. Verse 115, Surah number 2, أَيْنَمَا تَوَلُّوا فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ. Wherever you turn, there is the face of God. The Prophet ﷺ is telling us that ihsan, making beautiful, and not just being good, being excellent in the metaphysical and the aesthetic and the ethical mode, is to worship God constantly, as if you could see Him. The whole of your life, wherever you turn, you should be seeing that divine beauty. And to the extent that you see that divine beauty, you translate this vision into ethical action and into artistic creativity, of course, if you are an artist. The Imam Ali alayhi salam, karramallahu wajhahu, tells us in a remarkable saying which underlines the importance of the aesthetic dimension of intellectual perception. He says that the husn of the aql, the beauty or the excellence or the fineness of the intellect, resides in this: the beauty of things outward and inward. Jamal al-zawahir wal-bawatin. That is where the beauty of the intellect itself is to be found, the excellence. It comes to fruition in the measure that it sees the beauty of things outward and inward. Jamil al-zawahir Jamal al-zawahir wal-bawatin. It's almost like a paraphrase, because inward beauty is, of course, virtue, and outward beauty is virtue exteriorized. The form of beauty is virtue exteriorized. The essence of virtue is beauty interiorized, according to the great saying of another sage in the tradition, Fritjof Schuon. Imam Ali also tells us that the very beginning of the work of the intellect, the foundation of the intellect, أول العقل التودد. The very beginning, the foundation of the intellect is not just love. He could have said would or wad or mahabba, but he said at-tawaddud, which is the manifestation of love, which is also simultaneously an assimilation of love. Those two key aspects are in this fifth form of the Arabic verb that Imam Ali uses so frequently. It's reflexive. So tawaddud is a mode of manifesting love which helps you to assimilate it. So the very foundation of the intellect pertains to this love which enables us to bring the intellect into its full, beautiful fruition, and that is to see the beauty of things inward and outward. So going back to the Hadith Jibreel, we may say, why was it that the angel did not ask the question, what is Tawheed? The answer is because all three of these, Islam, Iman and Ihsan, put together, they constitute precisely Tawheed. They're integrated into this oneness, because Ihsan is what calibrates both thought, Iman, what we must believe on the doctrinal plane, and what we must do on the practical plane. Ihsan is the calibrating, fine-tuning instrument that brings the other two, thought and action, into harmony with being. Going back to this idea of worshipping God then, as if you could see Him, this is not only a possibility, it's an actuality. We're told in a very, very remarkable saying of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Ra'aytu Rabbi fi ahsani surah." I saw my Lord in the most beautiful form. Again, you see how this notion of husn, of beauty, goes into every aspect of the Islamic enterprise, the effort to conform in submission to what? To divine beauty. He says, I saw my Lord in the most beautiful form, and that does not mean that he only saw him in that beautiful form. He sees him all the time, and that is proven by a hadith which is found in the Musnad of Ibn Hanbal, radiallahu anhu. In this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ confirms the following. God has devotees for whom he has established a path, a tariq, going from his essence to their hearts, and from their hearts to his essence. He, God, looks into their hearts, and they look at him through the eye of their hearts, the ayn of their qulub. The Prophet finishes on this. If they were to be veiled from this vision, even for a single hour, they would die. These are the ones who cannot live, in other words, without seeing God permanently from the eye of their heart. This saying helps us to understand the deeper implications of ihsan, worshipping God as if one saw him. It helps us to understand that when the Habibullah, the beloved of God, is told to worship his Lord all night except a little, half of it, or less than half. When he's told, قُمِ اللَّيْلَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا نِصْفَهُ وَانْقُصْ مِنْهُ قَلِيلًا أَوْ زِدْ عَلَيْهِ وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا. When he's told to do these acts of devotion, to recite the Qur'an, to invoke the name of God, وَاذْكُرِ اسْمَ رَبِّكَ وَتَبَتَّلْ إِلَيْهِ تَبْتِيلًا. What he's being told to do is not simply a series of mechanical acts of conformity to the order of the inscrutable will of an inaccessible deity. He's being invited to participate in loving communion with the source of infinite beauty. That's what's being given to all of us in principle through what the Prophet ﷺ said. He's being invited to gaze upon his Lord with the eye of his heart. This formal worship, standing for hours, half of the night, less than half, more than half. This formal worship where you're gazing upon the sun of absolute beauty allows you to see that same sun wherever you look thereafter, in all the forms of divine manifestation. So you're in a permanent, inalienable presence of the Beloved. In a very famous Hadith Qudsi which describes the Waliullah, it's a hadith which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. I declare war, God says, on whoever opposes one of my awliya. Waliyun li is how it actually comes in that form, one of my friends. It goes on to describe two forms of worship and two types of worshipper, but it's the same slave that can go from the first stage to the second. And in this we're told that God loves nothing more than that which he has made obligatory. بِالشَّيْءٍ أَحَبُّ إِلَيَّ مِمَّا افْتَرَضْتُهُ عَلَيْهِ. I love nothing more than that which I have made obligatory upon my slave. First and most important thing is, of course, the Qur'an has been made obligatory upon us after faith. It's farada alayk. God has made the Qur'an a farida upon you. It is itself a kind of obligation. But all of the obligations, the fasting, the zakat, the prayer 5 times a day, they are all described by God in this Hadith Qudsi as things more than which God does not love. Why does God love nothing more than these duties of prayer, of fasting, of zakat, of performing the Hajj once if one can, and of bearing testimony? Why is it that he loves these things? Because they must be beautiful. Why are they beautiful? Because they lead to a vision of absolute beauty. How do they lead to that vision of absolute beauty? Through the Quranic substance of that worship. That when we're fasting and praying, and when we're paying zakat, all of this goes back to the cornerstone of the structure of worship, which is the recitation of the Holy Quran. That Quran that we've described as ultimate beauty and the means by which we engage with that absolute beauty. So if we look at it in these terms, the mechanical acts of worship, the actual movements in the Salah, are transformed into so many modes of dancing to the Beloved, with the Beloved. The recitation that we perform is like a song that we sing to the Beloved. That's how we can understand the prophetic definition, designation of Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam as Habibullah, the Beloved of God. He is the one whose beauty renders him utterly beloved to God. Inna Allah jameel wa yuhibbul jamal. If we understand this, we see that the Salat ala Nabi is not just a pious act intended to elicit blessings from God for oneself. Rather, it is an assimilation of the prophetic beauty. Every time we, with our heart, bless the name of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, we are interiorizing the beauty that we understand him to constitute, and in a measure that we understand that he is beautiful, and that's what makes him the beloved of God. This also helps us to see why the Prophet plays such an important role in all of the Islamic arts, particularly in the Ottoman calligraphy, the art called the Hilya, the ornamental description of the descriptions of the known as the Shama'il, the qualities of the Prophet. We emulate the Prophet as a beautiful role model. Again, let's see the way the Quran refers to him. It's an uswa hasana, beautiful role model. It's what the Quran tells us. Secondly, if you love God, we're told in the Quran, if you love God, follow me. This is what the Prophet himself has told. In kuntum tuhibbun Allah fattabi'uni yuhibbukum Allah wa yaghfir lakum. So the Prophet is told to say to us as believers, if you love God, follow me. God will love you. This is what we're invited to do. Let's turn to this verse 53 of Surah 41. We shall show them our signs on the horizons around them and within their own souls. سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَهُمْ أَنَّهُ الْحَقُّ. We shall show them our signs on the horizons around them and within their souls until it becomes clear to them that God is the truth. Now, we cannot attain the capacity to see God's signs around us and within us on the empirical plane, physically. This is something that we have to decipher with the eye of the heart, which we heard about earlier in the hadith. Only the heart can see the signs of God around us and within ourselves. The hearts, the Quran tells us, are the means by which we come to see clearly. Do they not have hearts by which to see, we're told, to understand? يَعْقِلُونَ بِهَا, by which they use their intellect. So the intellect is used, as it were, it's applied fully by the heart, not by the mind. In one verse we're told, not blind are the eyes, but blind are the hearts and the breasts, in verse 46 of Surah 22. Now the majority of souls, unfortunately, do not have hearts which see spiritual realities, and the Quran again tells us why. بَلْ رَانَ عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ مَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ, which is very close to the Hindu idea of karma, of bad karma, because the Quran doesn't say what they have done has rusted their hearts. It says what they have earned, مَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ, is what has rusted over their hearts. So the bad actions, the bad thoughts, intentions, put a rust over the mirror of our hearts, preventing us from seeing what we can see. Those hearts which are pure, like unsullied, spotless mirrors, are the ones who will be capable not only of spiritual vision, but the vision that we had earlier, the ihsani vision, worshipping God as if we could see Him and not just see His signs. Hazrat Ali alayhi salam was also one who affirmed his capacity to see God. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, "Ra'aytu Rabbi fi ahsani surah." I did see my Lord in the most beautiful form. Imam Ali was asked, "Have you seen your Lord?" as a kind of test by Dhillib the Yamani. He said, "Of course I've seen my Lord. I would not worship a Lord I had not seen." And then he said, "Well, how did you see him?" He said, "Well, eyes do not see him, but the hearts see him. Eyes do not see him according to outward vision, but hearts see him according to the haqa'iq al-iman, the spiritual verities of faith. In other words, the spiritual realities that unfold from heartfelt faith. لا تدركه العيون بمشاهدة العيان ولكن تدركه القلوب بحقائق الإيمان. It's one of the most marvelous expressions of balagha, apart from the wisdom. Hearts see God according to the spiritual realities unfolding from heartfelt faith. Now, how do we get to this vision? The dhikrullah, remembrance of God. Because the Prophet ﷺ tells us, for everything there is a means of polishing. لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ سِقَالَةٌ وَالسِّقَالَةُ الْقُلُوبِ ذِكْرُ اللَّهِ. And the means of polishing the heart is the remembrance of God. Imam Ali comments on this saying, in a sense, by using the Ayat al-Nur as the basis for one of his sermons in the Nahj al-Balagha. And here he's talking about the verse that comes right after the Ayat al-Nur, and he says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ جَعَلَ الذِّكْرَ جِلَاءً لِلْقُلُوبِ. Truly God has made the dhikr a polish for the hearts, by which they come to see, they, referring back to the hearts, they come to see after being blind, and hear after being deaf, and yield after being resistant. Now this seeing and hearing through the heart by means of the invocation of the name of God brings us right back to the Quran itself. Not only does the name of God polish your heart as dhikrullah, but the Quran does exactly the same thing as the word of God, differentiated. Because Imam Ali also says to us that the Quran is that by means of which you see, by means of which you hear, by means of which you do all of your actions, in other words. So we have a complementarity between the dhikrullah, which polishes the heart, enabling it to see and hear, and the recitation of the Quran, which Imam Ali says is so powerful that he who recites the Quran, فَكَأَنَّمَا أُدْرِجَتْ النُّبُوَّةُ فِي جَنْبَيْهِ. مَنْ قَرَأَ الْقُرْآنَ فَكَأَنَّمَا أُدْرِجَتْ النُّبُوَّةُ فِي جَنْبَيْهِ. The one who recites the Quran, it's as if nubuwwah is being caused to enter by degrees into his very being. And this, the two sides he refers to, so it's almost something physical. There's something tangible entering into you when you recite the Quran, if you are receptive to it, of course. But he says you will never become a messenger. It's as if nubuwwah is coming into you. And what is this as if? Walaya. That's another subject. Now, we come to the second part of the hadith we referred to earlier, Hadith Qudsi. In this second part we're told, after the slave comes closer to his Lord by the fara'id, and these fara'id, remember, God loves nothing more than these fara'id. We then have the transference of this love from the focus on the acts to a focus on the being, the soul of the worshipper. Because now we're talking about God's love focused on the slave who comes closer to him through the nawafil, through voluntary devotions over and above the fara'id. And he says, my slave doesn't cease to come close to me through the nawafil, hatta uhibbahu, until I love him. And when I love him, I am the hearing by which he hears, the sight by which he sees, the hand by which he smites, the foot upon which he walks. There's a communion, a union that's taking place, a tawheed at the highest level. In this Hadith Qudsi, which is very well authenticated, even if the majority of the ulama and the muhaddithin have difficulties explaining it, but through Sufism it can be explained while maintaining transcendence and immanence. The tanzih and the tashbih are not in any way contradictory. So to speak of this vision of God through the heart is to speak of God's vision, God's hearing, through the saint, through the waliullah. Abu Talib al-Makki, quoted by Ibn Arabi, says, "No one can see him to whom nothing is similar, but him to whom nothing is similar." In other words, no one can see God apart from God. And this vision goes through the heart, but God is the subject and God is the object. That is the walaya that we're speaking of, the sanctity, the one in which we see the unitive dimension going from God as al-wali, innama waliyukumullah, your wali is only God. But then we're told, and his prophet and the believers, those who pray and who establish worship and give charity while in the ruku. The Sabab Nuzul tells us that Imam Ali was doing the ruku and he gave away his ring in charity. So all of this category of believers is summarized in the person of Ali ibn Abi Talib, who gives us the perfect example of this walaya, what we can all aspire to. This walaya which relates directly to al-wali, which is God himself. God is the hearer and the seer in all authentic acts of perception, cognition, and of course creativity stemming from that perception. So we have access to this vision insofar as we are extinguished from our creaturely specificity, insofar as we undergo fana, not as an ultimate state necessarily, but as a process, a continuous extinction in the face of what we're seeing. This process of fana, walaya, can be seen as the archetype of the artist's self-effacement before divine creativity. When a truly sacred art, divine art, emerges through the hands of the artist. For Rusbehan Makli, this condition is the basis upon which we can speak of not just the vision, but the vision of the vision, Iyan al-Iyan. This, according to Rusbehan, is the highest mode of Tawheed. It's the deciphering of the cosmic text, which he refers to as iltibas. Everything about the cosmos is a mode of enrobing, of amphiboly, Koran translated as. One thing enrobing another. That is the divine reality enrobing the manifestation, and the manifestation in a certain sense enrobing the divine reality. We have to disrobe the divine from the human in order to see the divine without any of the human or creaturely trappings. And this is the true muwahid, according to Rusbehan Makli, 12th century, 100 years before Ibn Arabi. Many of Ibn Arabi's doctrines of Wahdat al-Wujud, with a particular emphasis on beauty, on aesthetics, is found in the writings of Rusbehan, which makes him an extremely important figure in this idea of the metaphysics of aesthetics. And unfortunately, most of the work that's been done on him is in French through Koban, so people who can't read the Persian or the Arabic are at a disadvantage if they don't have the French. Koban devotes one of his books, volume 2 on Islam Iranian, completely to Rusbehan Makli. Now, according to him, Rusbehan, the most profound meaning of witnessing, of the shahada, is that the witness, the shahid, knows that he is the witness and the object of witness, the object of divine contemplation. He's the means by which God contemplates his own creation. This is how the shahid, the witness, becomes a shaheed, the martyr, the one who dies in the face of what he witnesses, and through whom God's perceptions can operate. But none of this can come about without, again with Rusbehan, we have a double process taking place. Not just the negation of the soul's self-consciousness, but the negation of the negation. But by means of the first negation, the transcendence of the individual is realized. The soul is reduced to nothing before the divine transcendence. But by means of the second negation, the fana, anil fana, this produces a baqa, a subsistence. The soul returns to a transfigured mode of existence, and one in which the divine reality, as we've just seen, sees through him and hears through him. He writes as follows in the Risalat al-Quds: without yourself, it's very important, without yourself, the vision of the vision shines within you. Every atom of your being will proclaim, I am the truth, Ana al-Haq. This is the mystery, the very mystery of Tawheed. Al-Halaj sings, Fana fana'i, fi fana'i, fafi fana'i, wajata anta. In my extinction was extinguished, and in my extinction I saw you. I found you, you found yourself. It depends on how you read it. Wajata anta means you found yourself through this process of extinction of extinctions. I've been told to conclude, so what I'm going to do is go straight to the conclusion in obedience to the command.
The next session.
Of course, no, I know, that's why when at 9:30 I said, are we going to start soon? And so, well, very soon. I knew it would mean that things would get cut short. Never mind. How do we conclude? I'll give you a few sayings of Ruz Bahan Baki and then conclude with one paragraph. In the measure that the lover perceives in the qualities of the beloved the primordial beauty, husn asli, his love will increase. For the lamp of love, and this is probably the most important statement in this whole lecture, so I'll ask you to pay attention. The lamp of love is fed by the oil of eternal beauty. Misbah ishq ra rohan az husn qadam ast. I'll repeat it. The lamp of love is fed by the oil of eternal beauty. Such a love only comes about, according to Ruz Bihan, when, to quote him again, the sadness of love washes away with its tears the ephemeral dust from the face of the eternal bride. Only then can you speak about light upon light, nurun ala nur, which is what Ruz Bihan is commenting upon in this idea of the oil feeding the lamp. Now we won't talk about Layla and Majnun, but we will go back to the dhikrullah and complete on this. The Prophet ﷺ said to us, increase your dhikr hatta yaqulu majnoon, until they say you're a madman. Increase your dhikr until they call you mad. And the madness in question has nothing to do with ordinary insanity, because in the Surah Al-Qalam we're told, swearing by the pen, وَالْقَلَمِ وَمَا يَسْطُرُونَ مَا أَنْتَ بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ بِمَجْنُونَ. You are not, by the grace of the Lord, a madman. You are on a tremendous character. وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. We understand now that this tremendous character of the Prophet ﷺ is one which relates fundamentally to the names and qualities of God, which are reflected in the mirror of his being, as we heard last night in the beautiful Ilahi sung by our Turkish professor. The names and qualities they designate, these names and qualities of God that we find reflected in the perfectly polished mirror of the prophetic being, renders him not only Rasulullah, the messenger of God, but also it renders him the dazzling, most beautiful disclosure of the nature of God. Love of the beauty of the Prophet is therefore not only an indispensable principle in Islamic spirituality, it's also one of the key dynamics within the contemplative process by which sacred art is produced in Islam. The other dynamic, the recitation of the Quran, is intertwined with the love of the prophetic beauty. For both phenomena derive from the Haqiqah Muhammadiyah, the Muhammadan reality. The first manifestation of the divine essence, from which spring all the disclosures of the beauty of the hidden treasure. There is therefore no Islamic art worthy of the name that is not, to one degree or another, a manifestation of Habibullah, the beloved beauty of God. Sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Thank you all for your attention. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Reza Sheikh Kazmi, for sharing your delightful and thoughtful views with us. Now, the second speaker of our session is Mr. Kamil Khan Mumtaz. Kamil Khan Mumtaz is a Pakistani architect in private practice in Lahore. He was trained at the Architecture Association School of Architecture, London in the 1960s, after which he returned to Pakistan to practice and teach. He was head of the National College of Arts in Lahore from 1966 to 1975. He has been a member of several architecture juries and has widely lectured in Europe and Asia. In 1985, he authored Architecture in Pakistan, a concept media publication. His contribution to the theory and practice of traditional architecture is widely respected. Ladies and gentlemen, Kamil Khan Mumtaz.
Trying to catch my breath after that. Beautiful presentation. Dr. Reza, thank you very much. General Saab, your permission. This paper discusses the traditional art of calligraphy in the contemporary cultural context, with particular reference to recent efforts on the one hand to modernize Islamic calligraphy and on the other hand to Islamicize modern art, or such constructs as calligraph art. It is our contention that these efforts are predicated on an uncritical acceptance of the modernist definition of art that relegates calligraphy to the category of a craft, and the modernist evolutionary cultural narrative that equates change with progress and development. That is, modernity, the modernity project that now threatens to destroy our humanity and our environment. May I suggest that you turn the volume a little bit lower? There is some feedback. Thank you. And a lot of resonance, which makes it a bit difficult, I think, to hear clearly. Thank you. Right. Until recently, we thought of art as a means of imparting aesthetic pleasure, a means of seeing ourselves and the world we live in through the refined and subtle sensibilities of the artist. Today, we talk of art as an industry, the music industry, the entertainment industry, and as a commercial activity, the consumer product, the art market. Much of what is presented as art today is so far removed from the aesthetic criteria of a generation ago that it is difficult to find an acceptable definition that can be applied to the art products across different stages of human history. At best, we define art as a special kind of creative, innovative, imaginative activity, a means of self-expression. From play school up, we teach art as a means of developing these qualities. We encourage our children to explore, to let their imaginations run freely. We encourage art students to experiment with different materials and techniques. Why? Because we believe that creative, innovative, imaginative thinking is a decisive advantage in a competitive economy and is the basis for pushing the frontiers of knowledge. It is thus considered necessary for progress and development not only in art but equally in science, technology, business, mass communications, etc. Thus, the promotion of art, particularly at the basic levels, is seen as essential for the success of both the individual and society. Now there are two problems with this view of art. First, it does not explain most of mankind's greatest works of art and architecture. That is, all of the art that has been produced outside the post-Renaissance Eurocentric cultural domain. Secondly, it is premised on the modernity paradigm that is based on a materialist worldview, a paradigm that defines progress and development in terms of material criteria, the pursuit of which has brought our planet and our humanity to the brink of destruction. So let us restate the traditional perspective of art to remind ourselves that the art of calligraphy can be reduced to superficial levels of stylistic preferences and trendy graphics only at the cost of losing a profoundly valuable means of accessing a worldview that has defined our humanity and sustained our environment for millennia. Traditionally, the term art includes all the arts and crafts. In fact, it is applied to making or doing anything that meets the dual criteria of utility and beauty. Now, utility, appropriateness to function and purpose, relates to quantity and the more obvious practical and physical aspects of material and form. But beauty relates to quality and is traditionally understood as a quality of the divine. In the traditional cosmology, all creation, everything in the created universe, is a manifestation of the divine. In the creative process, the attributes and qualities of the divine are reflected first as archetypes on the plane of the spirit or the ideal plane, then as pure forms on the imaginary plane, and finally as natural and man-made objects and acts on the earthly plane. However, some objects and acts are more transparent, that is, the ideal forms are more readily recognized in them than in others which are more opaque. For example, qualities such as proportion, harmony, balance, symmetry, etc., are more readily recognized in certain mathematical relationships, in music and other works of art. Similarly, a human form or a tree or a sunset may strike us as perfect because it corresponds with our idea of a perfect man or woman or tree, etc. Indeed, every earthly object, artifice or act takes on a symbolic meaning to the extent that it reflects its heavenly archetype. The perfected man, the Insan-e-Kamil, the fully realized man, is a mirror that reflects all of these qualities, that is, absolute being. This is his essential nature, his true self, and the potential within every human. But we are veiled from the knowledge of the real by the phenomenal world, and we are veiled from our true self by our animal desires. To realize his potential, man must recover his lost nature, his primordial nature made in the image of God, but which he lost at the fall. It is when human nature recovers its original wholeness that access to the spirit, the eye of the heart, becomes possible. He must undertake an inward journey from the body through the soul to the heart. For it is the heart that is the seat of the spirit. Only when the eye of the heart is opened can it contemplate the real and attain enlightenment. Traditional man measured human development in terms of the progress made on this journey towards enlightenment. The role of art in traditional societies has been to act as support in this spiritual quest or journey by reminding us of our role and function in this life, by pointing to our true goal and by illuminating the way to that goal. Within this framework, the artist or craftsman cannot presume to be original, except in the sense of returning to the origin. Or to create beauty, for beauty already exists as an objective reality. He can only aspire to reflect it in his work. But how can he reflect the heavenly archetype that by definition lies beyond this sensible world, the phenomenal world of matter, space and time? To begin with, every artist or craftsman acquires his art or craft skill from a recognized master. The master, in turn, invariably traces the source of this art through a chain of masters to a divinely inspired source, a prophet, a saint, a sage, or a great master who was both skilled in his art and spiritually enlightened. But none of these sources claim to be the originators or creators of the art in question, only to have been the vehicles or recipients of these gifts from the Divine Spirit. This is why the great classical forms in every traditional art and craft are held in such veneration and esteem. They are handed down from master to apprentice, from generation to generation. These forms are copied by students not only as a means of perfecting their technical skills, but also as a means of purifying the spirit or acquiring a special blessing. They are used by professionals as exemplars, points of reference, guiding framework or grounds for their own work. The superiority of calligraphy over representational art is discussed in some detail by Abul Fazl, whom we heard also last night, the court historian of Akbar the Great, in the section on the painting studios in the Ain-e-Akbari. And let me quote Abul Fazl. He says, "An impression of the possessor of the form is found in the image, and an assessment of reality is gained from this impression. The letters and words are known through the shape of the line, and meaning is discerned from the letter and the word. Although the likeness of the body is drawn in the picture, which is well known, and the European artists enable the spectators to roam the cloisters of reality by bringing forth strange and wondrous forms in innumerable creative manners and styles, so that the eye is deceived into taking the likeness for the real. But writing has a far loftier and superior status, because it informs us of the experiences of ancient masters, and the intellect and understanding is developed by this intimacy." Abul Fazl goes on, "The best form of illustration is calligraphy. Those who are attracted by outer appearances only, regard the written word as a black form, but those who can discern the truth understand it as a lamp of discernment. It is true that it is darkness," he says, "but hidden and radiant in this darkness are thousands of luminous torches. In fact, it is absolutely correct to say that near the mold of the immature eye is a brilliant chandelier. It is an imprint of the divine handiwork, the sanat, which was referred to by Dr. Rita, a product from the domain of truth and spirituality. It is a night in which the sun is radiant and manifest. It is a dark cloud from which are raining radiant and brilliant pearls. It is the treasure of sight and the secret chamber of reality. It is a strange and wonderful talisman that speaks in a world of silence. It is static, but it has the power of motion. It is an untilled field, but is a seeker on the path of heavenward flight. Its reality is that of a beam from the divine torch of knowledge that falls on the articulate soul. The heart conveys this beam to the imaginal world, which is intermediate between the abstract and the material worlds, so that the abstract may establish a relationship with the material, and an absolute entity may become accustomed to the bonds of confinement. After this stage, the beam descends from the celestial imaginal world to the heart, and comes from the heart to the tongue, and from the tongue enters the ear through the air, and after this, freeing itself from material ties one after the other, returns to its real center. Sometimes it so happens that this celestial traveler is aided by the fingertips to tour the land and sea of pen and ink, and having completed its excursion, is brought down to the parlor of the page of white paper. And he concludes, this celestial guest flies off to the higher world by way of the eyes, leaving its footprint on the sheets of paper. That's the end of the long quote from Abul Fazl, but I thought it would be highly educational, particularly to, well, we can discuss this if you like later. So what's the problem with our art historians? The art historic method catalogues and categorizes art under distinct styles, defined in terms of formal characteristics, and explains the evolution or development of each style by tracing each form to its origin, source, or precursor, or to its social, economic, and other environmental determinants. Thus, Islamic art is treated as a style characterized by such elements as geometry, non-figurative or abstract forms that are supposed to have evolved to circumvent the prohibition against representation of animate forms, or the horror vacui of desert nomads. Alternatively, Islamic art is either denied recognition as an art on the grounds that it does not meet the criteria of originality and creative expression of the individual artist, and is classified as craft, or the lesser applied industrial or the useful arts, or is denied as a single category, since there is little in common between the widely varied productions in time and space, and because all the elements of each regional style can be traced to non-Islamic sources. Then we have the problem of the contemporary practitioner. Given the modern definition of art, and the traditional craftsman seeks acceptance and recognition as an artist by modernizing Islamic art, distorting the traditional forms and incorporating new forms to demonstrate his originality, his novelty, his creative expression. Whereas the modern artist seeks legitimacy in the eyes of his co-religionists by Islamicizing modern art, by incorporating some traditional motives such as geometric patterns and calligraphy. The effect in either case is to devalue tradition and to glorify modernism. This in itself would not have been remarkable were it not for the growing mountain of evidence that the present global environmental crisis is largely a direct consequence of the modern development paradigm that is based on material science, technology, and industry, and measures progress in terms of acquisition of material possessions and monetary gain. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kamil Khan Mumtaz and Mr. Raza Shah Kazmi, for sharing their delightful views with us. And now I would like to open the question and answer session, and your participation will be highly appreciated.
Committee and members of the College of Art and Design. First of all, I would like to thank both the speakers for a very eloquent, very thought-provoking debate on the issue of art, especially by Reza Shakar. I'm really impressed by the kind of style by which you can actually suck the listeners into your thought process. I don't have a question, I have a comment. You allow me? You mentioned the good and the evil. And I would like to share with you my perception. I think that most people actually contemplate that evil does exist. Which, in my honest and very humble opinion, evil probably doesn't exist. It only manifests itself when good does not exist, or in one way, when good is not practiced. So if we take three levels that we have identified, the practice, the actual part, the substance, and the zikr or dhikr that we have also known, and the contemplative issues. If the embodiment of human being, life, actually is devoid of all these three levels, then actually that level, for example, somebody is only performing the practice, the act, actuality, and is not performing the zikr or the contemplative level. And those two levels, there is a possibility of the evil manifesting itself. So for the completeness of the human personality, shakhsiya or zat, I think it's very imperative that the actual goodness in all these levels must be there in order to avoid whatever we can call evil. So evil probably does not exist, but it actually manifests itself in one way or the other when the goodness is devoid or rejected. That's one. I would like to also say a few words. The eye of the heart. Eye of the heart is, I think, is the substance and the topic that probably has not been discussed in the domain of philosophy and thoughts in the modern world. In my honest opinion, it looks that there is a great space for research, even by the scientists. But what is this electrical activity that the cardiologists talk about in the heart? And it's not linked to any other linkages of electrical activity. There is something in the heart that is so ethereal and so mystical that it has a link with the unknown that we know, but we are probably not aware of it. So I think that level of research is probably the need of the day, and that is where the artists and the scientists must join hands to actually further this thing. So these are the grounds that I would like to share. Anybody else would like to say?
Comment if Mr. Kavi wants to make a brief reply. Okay, I think this is more in the nature of a comment. So let's give chance people to ask questions, and then maybe then Brother Kavi or comments out and respond. Is there any more questions?
Thank you very much, Dr. Garland and Mr. Raman. Wonderful presentations. You very beautifully and insightfully elaborated on the fact that Islamic art is based on spirituality. Islamic art is something which is brought about by zikr and sana and husn. How do you, with all of this knowledge of ours and for your expertise, can pull Islamic art out of the category of minor art? How do we do that? What is the path to do that? Where do we begin? Do you have any suggestions? Do you have any readings that we can distribute among our students? We can start looking at Islamic art, which is an altogether different activity as compared to how it is conceived as a reproductive method where individuality and modernity does not really play any role. How do you see?
I think the answer is very simple, just do it.
Theorize this, and we have to actually have a grounding in telling our students how to look at it, where it is, how is it different. Of course, we do know it is different. We do know that the philosophy of Islamic art is very different to what the Western arts are sort of, given the category of higher art and minor art. But then the spirituality that we have in our own Islamic traditions is very different to the Western perspective. So there has to be a beginning to actually theorize it, take it forward.
Yes, of course. I think this is essentially what Dr. Raza and myself were trying to emphasize, and which is quite correctly identified, is that there is a fundamental and basic difference in the very foundations, attitudes, and approach towards art. Not just Islamic art, but all traditional art. There is a clear line between tradition and modernism, which is essentially in terms of the very worldview. So the first thing, where to begin? The first thing is to understand these issues, and then to decide within yourself where do you stand in relation to this. And if you can see clearly the evil, the problems, the dangers of the modernist position, well, be strong and clear, reject it. And if you can subscribe to the traditional worldview, the traditional basis of seeing reality, practice it. There's nothing else.
Well, just yes, one of the ironies is that in the traditional Islamic civilization, which alas we've all but lost, the relationship between philosophy, metaphysics, cosmology on the one hand, and the practice of art on the other, it wasn't necessary in a traditional context to theorize about it so much as it is necessary now, because we've lost it. It was something that was, as Khalid Saab said, it's something that was transmitted from master to disciple, and the doctrine was largely orally transmitted as well. A lot of hermetic sciences were transmitted through the craft initiations and things like that. Most of the artists and craftsmen in the, whether it's the Mughal context or the Safavid, Qajars after that, or the Ottomans, most of them operated within a very clearly defined guild framework. So these things were transmitted. You didn't have to think about them very much. It was part and parcel of the way you operated your art. But if you read, for example, a wonderful passage from Titus Burkhardt's book on Fez, the City of Islam, and his conversations with the craftsmen who made the combs out of the bones of animals, mostly cows, how he crafted from the bone of a cow a beautiful comb. Actually, I think I even have mine from Morocco to show you. That is a comb made out of bone, and it's incredible to read this account of the conversation that he had with the craftsman, because there you understood that a simple man who had not read much, but who was able to talk about the cosmological symbolism that was engaged in his making of the comb. And it showed you that in traditional society, of which this man was a representative, these things that we now call cosmology, metaphysics, Quranic exegesis, all of these fancy names for things, They were all given in a very practical and practicable, something you could practice, which is why Kamil Sahib is emphasizing the practice of it. Practice makes perfect, and in a sense, the practice today is what we need rather more than the theorizing of it. Of course the theory is important, and insofar as we go to the writings of the people that I mentioned, the impetus behind the questions that I posed came from these three individuals, really, including Sayyid Hussain Nasser, who's written a marvelous book called Islamic Art and Spirituality. And there he brings the two themes together very, very well. And his other books on civilization and science and so on. It shows a Tawhidi point of view. But also Titus Burkhardt's books, there's The Art of Islam, the book itself, The Arts of Islam, The Art of Islam. Then Martin Lings's works on calligraphy. And also, if you want the highest metaphysics, if you like, of aesthetics from this perspective, then Fritjof Schuon's chapters on art, especially in the book Esoterism as Principle and as Way, is to be strongly recommended, the criteria and principles of art. So we've got these writings from people who, if you like, have understood and rejected this modernist paradigm of art, who realize its limitations. At the same time as going into the traditional, mind you, but not just the Islamic tradition, but all of the traditions. All of them have their specificity, their originality, and their universality, by virtue of their traditional looking back, as Kamil Sahib said, looking back to the origin. True originality is going back to the origin. And what is the origin? It's not of a human making. The origin is always the point at which heaven touches earth, where God speaks to the human being. It's always revelation. So these revealed art, which are in all of the traditions you see. In Christianity, who was the first person who painted an icon? St. Luke, under divine inspiration. Who is the first person who taught calligraphy in Islam? Imam Ali for Islam. These are the ones they don't claim any originality. They just say this is what we have received from a higher source. So true originality from a traditional point of view is inseparable from revelation. Whereas from a modernist point of view, originality is to bring something from yourself. I have got an original idea that no one else has had before me. So what is that originality? It's egotism and individualism. What is originality in the traditional mindset? It's the effacement of the individual before the beauty of the creator that has inspired in one the ability to produce this art, which is why they didn't want to put their names to things. It wasn't me. If it's a true work of art, truly sacred, I wasn't the artist involved. A sanya was operating through me. So just to come briefly to the comment, if I may have a few minutes for that. Very good points that were made by Professor Siddiqui about good and evil, husn and qub, and how it can be related to the vision of the oneness of reality.
Hello. I'd like to...
Sorry. Please.
Assalamu alaikum. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. This is a very august occasion where all of us are talking about and the Word of God. When I started doing my PhD, I had to read the Quran in the reason being that when I read Iqbal, he said, I derive my knowledge from Rumi, and Rumi says that he derives his knowledge from the source, and the source is the Quran, and the Quran is the Word of God, and calligraphy mostly is all about that. But I'm sorry, I would like to say that the form is left, but the spirit is lost. unless we revive that spirit, and these are not my words, these are the words of a very able man, a Sufi, a Pakistani, Jacobus Michael, who invented the movable type in Nastali. I have written a research paper on him, and shortly it shall be published. He says, sadly in Islam, the form is left, but the spirit is not there anymore. The day we are going to grasp that spirit, it's going to lead us to reality. And reality is right in our heart. We know for sure we can communicate with reality as long as we are sincere. And the reality can communicate to us through the Quran, because it's a living book. And anybody who does calligraphy with that spirit, not just form, which surely is worshipping God, and all those who bestow from it its light. May the blessings of Allah be with all those who seek knowledge, because that is what makes insan kamil. And for me, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the person to be emulated. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment, and in a sense it answers the question, the comment here as well. Yeah, form without spirit is hypocrisy, and it's that hypocrisy that Professor Siddiqui was talking about, that when one has the mechanical operation of the Sharia without its spirit, that evil can actually come in, referring to people who are, of course, practicing the outward forms of Islam to some extent and then committing outrages in the name of Islam. And the Quran itself alerts us to that possibility. In the Surah Al-Ma'un, where we're told, Waylun lil Musallin, so woe be to those who pray. Just stop there is a remarkable statement. Woe be to those, it's a warning against those who are praying. وَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ وَيَمْنَعُونَ الْمَاعُونَ. So in those very, very short verses, you've got the diagnosis of what's really going wrong with us today. We're going through the forms, but without the spirit. We're doing it in order to be seen at worship. We're doing it and we're giving the lie to religion, and we're doing it without any sense of generosity of soul, which is summed up in this idea of withholding small acts of kindness, which is in the surah. So I agree with that. If I could just quickly go to the point that Professor Siddiqui made about good and evil, and how are we to relate this to our vision of the oneness of being. And in fact, I said it in the paper, when God tells us in the Quran that وَأَحْسَنَ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقَهُ, when God made beautiful everything He created, the obvious response from an atheist or a critic would say, well, there are many things that are in creation, in existence, that are far from beautiful, far from good, far from excellent. So how does one relate that to this thing that we're calling wahdatul wujud, the oneness of reality? And as usual, it's better to answer this sort of thing with a symbol rather than a long logical explanation. And the symbol is simply this: a tree that gives forth beautiful fruit. When the fruit is not eaten and it stays and it goes bad, do we actually blame the tree for producing a bad fruit? No. The tree is responsible for producing good fruit. And if one of the apples goes bad, that is the inevitable effect of the degeneration of time and other conditions on that piece of fruit. In exactly the same way, what God created, He created beautiful. فَأَحْسَنَ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقَهُ. And if within that creation things degenerate, you can't blame the Creator for that. The process takes its natural course. We don't ascribe the evil of creation to the Creator. We ascribe it to a source of degeneration. In our case, sort of our freedom that He's given us. Therefore, evil things can come. And that's why when we say in the Surah Al-Falaq, we say, قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ مِنْ شَرِّ مَا خَلَقَ, from the evil of that which He created, not from the evil which He created. The precision of the Quran there is extraordinary. مِنْ شَرِّ مَا خَلَقَ, from the evil of that which He created. So I just wanted to make that very brief point, and I'll hand over to Jen.
You had someone else who's not spoken so far. Gia. Okay, you got the mic ready, so you go ahead first, and then हम आपकी तरफ से आएंगे.
Mic
देखिए any mic, make it open.
Raja Sahib talked about enlightening the eye of heart, and Kamil Sahib called heart as the seat of soul. In the Holy Quran, the word qalb is used for heart, and in an exegesis of the Holy Quran, we learned that qalb stands for a combination of mind and heart. I need some comments from both of the scholars, both the world scholars on this.
Mic. Okay. Dr. Vazabal, he is, I think he's or this one.
You can use this one.
Sorry. Very briefly, it's a very complex question, of course, but in the Quran you have reference to the sadr, breast. Within the breast you have the qalb, but you also have a word for fu'ad, which is the inner heart, and you have the lub, which is the core, and you have the sir, even to a higher stage, the astral. You have these degrees of consciousness that are spoken of, all of which are to be understood as interiorization of mental consciousness. The Quran never talks really about simply the mind. It takes it for granted. Of course we know what the mind does, but what is the function of the heart? The sadr, it is in relation to Islam. It's the fu'ad that has to be opened up as the inner core of the heart. The lub, the people of substance, are the ones who speak from the depths, the kun of their intellect, the kun of the heart. And all of these degrees are integrated and analyzed very carefully in a work which I can recommend to you called the Science, I think it's called The Science of the Heart by Al-Hakim al-Tirmidhi. It's the best work on the heart. Also you have, and he goes through all of these degrees of consciousness. You also have Al-Ghazali's Ihya Ulumuddin, where book 21, I think it is, of the Ihya Ulumuddin is called Ajaib al-Qalb, the marvels of the heart, and he goes into many of these questions. Finally, you've got a book called The Eye of the Heart by Fritjof Schuon, and he looks at this phenomenon from different traditional viewpoints, not just from Islam, but even the Native American tradition, for example, of America. He shows how